Hey Andy, how's it going?
It is going great.
Awesome.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement here with the aircraft.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thanks for coming out and helping us publicize this. And of course, it's important to us. My name's Bill Thacker. I'm a volunteer pilot for the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association. And we use this TriMotor and its sister ship, which right now is not on tour, this one is, but we use it as an outreach from the Experimental Aircraft Association up in Oshkosh to go around the country and visit with our local chapters. And we do a revenue share there where we hop rides for the public to give them an opportunity to get up close and personal to a real piece of aviation history. This Ford TriMotor here was built in 1928. It actually birthed the airline industry. It was the first airplane. It was designed specifically to haul people. So everybody you see out here running around in a vest and all these are all volunteers. Nobody gets paid. We do this because we love aviation. We love meeting people like you.
Now, when you look at the history of this airplane, we know that Henry Ford was very much an aviation. He kind of slow to come to it, but once he really embraced aviation.
He bid hard.
And this, I guess, is the culmination of all of his work. This TriMotor, and here we are some 100 years later, and we're sitting in one of these aircraft, and it flies like a dream. I was just watching. Can you tell us a little bit about flying the airplane? Where does it like to be? What's the altitude you like?
Yeah.
This airplane?
Well, keep in mind that when this airplane was designed, it was almost considered. It wasn't considered. It really was a proof of concept because it was the very first airplane designed this big, to haul passengers specifically in an airline environment, in a scheduled service. Okay, so that's why we say it birthed the airline industry, because all the airlines at the time, this is the airplane that they started with, because this is all there was in 1928, 29, 30, up until 31, 32, when the DC-2, DC-3, and the Boeing 247s came out. But this airplane specifically, so without airways, without the means and speed to get up to the other altitudes and stuff like the DC-3 did and the Boeing 247, this normally flew around, treetop level, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet. You definitely would fly to where you could get your best winds. It's super important for winds with this airplane because it's only about 80 miles an hour. I know that in Wikipedia it says 122, but I'm here to tell you it's about 80 miles an hour, between 80 and 85 miles per hour. So if you're trying to buck a 30-knot wind, you knock your performance down or your distance down 40%. So your best bet then is maybe stay lower to get under those winds, or to climb up and to put them on your tail if you can figure out how to do that. But of course there's no oxygen or anything like that, so you couldn't get very high. These engines, when they were first put on here, though this airplane did use this Pratt Whitney R985, it didn't have the superchargers that these have on it now, so it would be what we would call normally aspirated. So its sweet spot would have been 5,000-6,000 feet,
right.
Where it would start then to lose power as you get up any higher than that. So for the most part, this thing flew around treetop. Plus the guys wanted to read the water tower, so they knew where they were.
And that was the thing, there was no GPS, there was no radio navigation going on or anything like that. None of the towers that we became familiar with in aviation, even in the early days, what I would consider early days, were available. So you're right. They kind of flew to the west, and they looked over and they saw something. They went by the water tower. What's the name on that water tower?
Yep. And actually, if you go, so a lot of people have heard about the early airmail beacons, okay? And so that system of navigation was being put in about along the same time, as because the government was issuing their mail contracts, the CAM, the Civil Air Mail, routes, in order to establish some airline service, meaning mail service, between cities. And so they were starting to develop these airway beacons, which were towers that were spaced just about from site to site, so you could see them, say 10, 20, maybe 30 miles away at the most, and they would have another beacon. It would have a light on top that went around, and you follow that. Now Lindbergh, they're called Lindbergh arrows. So Lindbergh, and I don't know if you've heard of this, Andy, or not, but you can look, there's actually still several of them that have been preserved, but they were these huge concrete arrows. They were huge arrows, about 30 feet long, and they would look like an arrow. And as a matter of fact, if you look on the side of this airplane, and the TAT, the Transcontinental Air Transport company or transport system, they use the shape of the arrow as part of their logo. And so they put these arrows on the ground. They were generally in conjunction with one of those beacons, so that when you hit the beacon, the arrow would point towards the next beacon. So you would be able to fly that. So then you could hold a heading, or you could have a mountain or a tree or something inside that you would keep flying towards, and be able to stretch just a little bit longer because you had a tad bit of help with a direction indicator. Say, hey, go that way.
Early navigation.
Early navigation.
Simply an arrow.
Was an arrow on the ground.
That is awesome.
Yeah, look them up. They're called Lindbergh arrows. Pretty cool.
We'll definitely do that. Well, the airplane itself, what kind of useful load do you have with the plane, and fuel burn? What are you holding on it?
Yeah, we hold 327 gallons of gas. We burn, and it's 100 low lead. It's regular aviation fuel. It burns. We say a gallon a minute. Okay, so maybe a gallon a minute in our ride operation, but if we get it up to cruise and get it throttled back and that, we can pull it on back then to about, instead of 60 gallons an hour, maybe 40, 45 gallons an hour across all three engines. Okay, and at that, then we're doing about 80, 83 miles per hour. So with about 3 hours range, again, I hate to throw 240, 250 miles out there because wind. You remember we talked about that before. At 80 miles an hour, a 30-knot wind is a big deal. Whether it's on your tail or on your nose, It makes a big difference in how far you could actually go.
So when you're doing flight planning, you're looking at 3 hours.
At the most, yeah, 3 hours. We'd like to put it on the ground. It's a 1928 airplane. We like to put it on the ground. I like to stretch my legs, and there's no lavatory. There used to be. There's a lavatory back there at the back of the airplane, but it was whole. Not unlike the trains of the,
right.
You didn't want to look up when there was a TriMotor flying by. There was a hole back there. But so we like to stop, and that way we've got plenty of reserve fuel on board, and we, gives us our outs.
All right. One thing I noticed about this aircraft, there's two different names up on the nose. What's the story with that?
Yeah, well, the story with this airplane specifically came into being to fly the Columbus, Ohio to Wichita route. It's maiden flights, and in its service life was spent flying between Columbus, Ohio and Wichita. The company that bought the airplane, that last bought the airplane, that owns the airplane now, is it's a museum. They're called the Liberty Aviation Museum in Port Clinton, Ohio. So they took the liberty of putting Port Clinton on one side. So it's got Port Clinton on one side and Wichita on the other.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, certainly understand that.
Yeah, they paid a lot of money for an airplane. They can put their name on it.
When the maintenance on this airplane, an annual or something like that. One thing I did notice, and we looked at some of the photography, folks can see that all the surface control cables are outside the aircraft.
Yeah.
It seems like the maintenance on this thing was relatively pretty easy. It'd been pretty easy to stay on top of things.
Well, again, you gotta keep going back to 1928 and where we were. Where we were in aviation. Where we were in the infrastructure of an airline. Environment. Okay, it wasn't there. The airports weren't there. The runways weren't there. The very first paved runway was 1928 in Dearborn, Michigan, which is where, by the way, all of the Ford TriMotors were built. Was at the Ford Motor Car. They had the Ford Aircraft Company was right there in Dearborn, and so part of the design criteria was forced because of what was available, and that was that it had to be serviced pretty much by anyone, by say some Ford garage mechanic, that had been working on Model Ts, because the Model A wasn't even out yet.
Right.
So you had to take that skill set and be able to transfer it in order to work on these airplanes if they should need some maintenance along the way. So everything's on the outside, one, to keep it simple and to keep it visual so the guys could see it and they can work on it with hand tools and a step ladder. And that was a huge design criteria on the airplane.
Well, the aircraft itself, just when you just look at it, it's iconic.
Oh,
when you see it,
it really is.
It
earned it.
When you see one in the air, and we understand that you've told us there's not really a lot of these planes left that are in the air.
No.
There might be a few that are still out there, maybe in museums and things, but ones in the air, not a whole lot. But when you see one, you immediately recognize it and know exactly what it is. If you have ever seen a TriMotor, you know one when you see it.
There is one caveat, I'll give that, because some people will walk up to me. Well, there's two. Okay, one, there was an airplane that was built in the 70s. They revisited it because this airplane proved extremely useful, even in the 70s here in America, to be smoke jumpers. So the Johnson Smoke Company, you know, the smoke jumpers out
right.
in Montana and Missoula, they love this airplane because you've seen me here. I can take off in less than 1,000 feet, and I'm climbing like a rocket, you
right.
know. And so it was perfect, and it was plenty big enough that they could put a bunch of smoke jumpers in this and put them out to fight fires. So there was a company that put themselves together called Bushmaster, and they made some new ones of these. I don't know how many, 2 or 3 of them that they made, and that was exact copies of these, but they were brand spanking new airplanes.
Wow.
So they did that. So I have to throw that out there. They're not Ford TriMotors. They're called Bushmasters. And then the other one is everybody asks, is this the Indiana Jones airplane? Okay, and it's not, because that's a Yonkers, the Yonkers 52. And so there's a big battle then about who was first, you know, and who was on first, you know,
right, sure.
and I have to say, unfortunately, Yonkers kind of beat us to the draw on that.
Well, I gotta tell you, you're to be commended first in the volunteer time and
twist my arm
that you put in to keeping this bit of history alive, and that's what's amazing to me. The aircraft, you can get it, you can smell it, you can feel it, and it's living history.
It is
for America's aviation world.
Yeah.
And that is probably the most impressive thing about this aircraft and what the EAA does across the board.
Yeah.
is to get out and,
yeah.
and be able to really feel and understand.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to know where you're going if you haven't known if you don't know where you've been.
Exactly, and that's why we're here. That's why we're here in St. Simons, and why we're on the road essentially all year long. We get back to Oshkosh during our annual convention at the end of July, and then after that the airplane goes out on the road and stays on the road until the following July. Now, there's some regular points that we make it back to, of course, and that's the Liberty Aviation Museum because they own the airplane, so we're usually there 2 to 3 weekends a summer. You know, we're always there on July 4th for their big wing ding, you know, and so we do show up there. But other than that, we're touring, and I've toured everywhere. California to Oregon to Texas we're on our way to Florida now, to up into the Northeast, Massachusetts, you know, you name it, we go there, and we've been there.
Well, thanks a lot for being with us.
You bet.
And sharing a little bit of time and showing us this wonderful aircraft today.
You bet. Thanks for coming, Andy.
Take care and be safe.
Yep. See you around the campus.